It was a typical hot and humid morning in Florida, sweat trickling down the backs of travelers as they shuffled to the terminal at Miami International Airport. The bustling sounds of rolling luggage, chatter, and overhead announcements filled the air, but nothing could drown out the piercing cries of an escalating altercation. Amidst the sea of weary travelers, a confrontation had taken a dark turn. The scene, once just another busy checkpoint, was now a chaotic flashpoint. An airport security officer, one of many who worked tirelessly to keep the airport safe, was lying on the ground, struggling for breath. His assailant stood over him, barely contained by a team of officers who had quickly arrived at the scene. The cause of the scuffle? The details were unclear, but one thing was for certain. Things had gone too far. With blood on the agent's uniform and the suspect's demeanor cold and defiant, questions began to swirl. Was the use of force in this case justified, or had things gone horribly wrong? The story that followed would unravel the truth, piecing together what led to the incident and what came after. Keep watching as we dive deep into the mystery of the Florida airport incident. If you haven't yet, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like this video if you find it intriguing, and share it with your friends. It's time to uncover the truth. Let's get started. Miami International Airport, the bustling gateway to the world, is one of the busiest airports in the United States. Spanning over 3,000 acres and handling over 45 million passengers annually, the terminal is a vital hub for travelers from across the globe. On the morning of the incident, it was no different. People from all walks of life hurriedly shuffled through security checks, some on their way to a relaxing vacation, others bound for a business trip, and many, just like the incident's key players, unknowingly stepping into the epicenter of a violent confrontation. The day started like any other. Airport security officers, trained for any emergency, were on high alert due to a recent uptick in passenger traffic. The individual in question, a middle-aged man named Mark Rogers, was just another traveler passing through. But his story was far from ordinary. Rogers, a man with a long history of minor infractions at airports, had managed to avoid serious incidents before that day. However, something was different about this trip. His nervous energy was palpable, and the recent events of his personal life seemed to have caught up with him. He was short with airport staff, visibly frustrated, and everything seemed to trigger him, no matter how small. But it wasn't until he was stopped at security that things took a turn. Security agent Michael Carter, a veteran of Miami International, was in charge of the screening checkpoint that morning. Having worked in the airport's high-pressure environment for nearly a decade, Carter had dealt with everything from irate travelers to major security threats. But nothing could have prepared him for what unfolded with Mark Rogers. It began with a standard security screening. Rogers, who appeared to be carrying several bags, was approached by Carter for a routine check. The interaction quickly escalated when Rogers grew agitated over the time it was taking to clear security. His hands trembled as he reached for his bag, attempting to remove items in haste. Carter, noticing Rogers' growing anxiety, attempted to calm him down, explaining the process. "So, please just place the items in the tray," Carter said, his voice firm but calm, attempting to prevent things from escalating. But Rogers was having none of it. He began shouting, demanding to be treated with respect, and accusing Carter of delaying him unnecessarily. His frustration grew as Carter repeated the instructions. It wasn't long before Rogers' voice rose, causing others in the checkpoint line to turn their heads. "Stop treating me like I'm a criminal. You people always do this to me," Rogers snapped, his face reddening. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. Security footage from the incident shows Rogers suddenly lunging at Carter, pushing him away with unexpected force. A bystander, startled by the sudden aggression, shouted for help. Moments later, Rogers had backed Carter into a corner, his fists clenched as he loomed over the officer. In self-defense, Carter deployed his taser. But it was too late. Rogers, enraged, knocked the weapon out of Carter's hands, and with one forceful strike, Carter collapsed to the ground, blood seeping from a gash on his temple. The chaos at Miami International immediately drew attention. The incident was captured in full by security cameras, but there were many gaps that only the individuals involved could explain. Rogers was quickly apprehended, but not without resistance. As police officers struggled to detain him, the public was left to wonder, was a force used by Carter truly justified? In the aftermath, law enforcement swiftly began their investigation, interviewing witnesses and reviewing the footage. Rogers, who was later taken into custody, had a history of minor assaults and verbal outbursts at airports, but nothing to suggest he was capable of the violent act he had just committed. Was there something more to his anger, or had he simply snapped under pressure? As detectives delved deeper into Rogers' background, they discovered a series of troubling red flags. Rogers had recently been through a messy divorce, and he had been struggling with depression and anxiety. His most recent psychiatric evaluation showed that he had become increasingly agitated, particularly in stressful environments like airports. Was it these mounting pressures that had caused him to lash out, or was something else at play? Meanwhile, Carter's colleagues were speaking out in his defense, claiming that he had acted in self-defense after being physically assaulted. But some began to question whether his use of force, particularly the taser, was proportionate to the situation. As the investigation unfolded, a debate began to form around the use of force. Some witnesses claimed that Rogers had been the aggressor, but others weren't so sure. One passenger, seated further down the line, reported hearing Rogers shouting long before the physical confrontation, which suggested he had been trying to de-escalate the situation. Was there more to this than just a simple altercation? Some pointed to possible procedural failures. Was Carter's approach too confrontational from the start? Could the situation have been diffused with better communication? Another theory emerged. Was there an underlying systemic issue at the airport that led to the emotional breakdown of passengers like Rogers? What made the situation even murkier was the fact that the use of tasers by law enforcement had already been a controversial topic in recent years. Did Carter act out of fear, or did he rely on force too readily? Was the use of the taser justified given the apparent level of threat? Some speculated that the officers were quick to resort to force due to the escalating nature of the situation, especially in a high-profile, high-stakes environment like an airport. The trial was nothing short of a media circus. The courtroom was packed, with local news stations covering every detail of the proceedings. Rogers' defense attorney argued that his client was under severe emotional distress, pointing to his mental health issues and recent personal turmoil. They claimed that Rogers had been pushed too far and that his reaction had been a result of an emotional breakdown. On the other hand, Carter's defense stood firm, stating that the officer had acted in self-defense. They argued that, given Rogers' aggression and the potential threat, Carter had no other choice but to use force. The judge, after several weeks of testimony, ultimately ruled that Carter had acted in self-defense. However, the case left behind an unsettling legacy. The airport reassessed its security protocols, implementing new training for officers on de-escalation techniques and mental health awareness. In the end, the question remains, was the force used by Officer Carter justified, or had the system failed both him and Rogers? Though justice was served in the courtroom, many continued to question whether the use of force was truly necessary, or if the situation could have been handled differently. As we look back at this case, it's clear that there's much more beneath the surface. The emotional and psychological factors that led to Rogers' outburst may never be fully understood, and the use of force by law enforcement remains a hot-button issue in modern policing. What do you think? Was Officer Carter justified in using force to defend himself, or was this an example of unnecessary escalation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share if you enjoyed this deep dive into the Florida airport incident. Let's keep the conversation going and continue to uncover the truth behind these high-stakes situations.